listening to the Stand Angler, and my daddy's the host.
All right, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction. If you're new here, my name is Rick Crawford, and I'm the host of the Sustainable Angler Podcast, president of Emerger Strategies, and founder of the Fly Fishing Climate Alliance. So I'm super stoked to share this interview with y'all. It is with Chris Wittman, who is the co-founder of Captains for Clean Water. And we discuss everything from how Chris started guiding, the history of Everglades restoration, and what Big Sugar is doing to prevent restoration. We also talk about what you can do today to support Captains for Clean Water by signing their petition to oppose Big Sugar's lawsuit over a critical Everglades restoration project. Be sure to check out our website. It's www.thesustainableangler.com to read blog posts, get caught up on previous episodes, and show your support for the podcast. The Sustainable Angler is a proud member of 1% for the Planet and is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. The Sustainable Angler is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, OHM Radio, 96.3 FM. The Sustainable Angler podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and A New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging.
We set out with a New Earth Project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. You know, people send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like a New Earth Project, is it's like, we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
Fishing taught me that everything in nature is interconnected. Just as a fiddler crab, a tailing redfish, and a marsh ecosystem are connected, so are our businesses and our planet. And we have a vision of businesses and the environment thriving together. Imagine a company that not only champions the sport of fishing, but also leads on climate action and conservation efforts. Products and packaging that are friendly to marine life and that degrade harmlessly back into the earth. It's not a dream, it's a strategy, and that's what we do at Emerger Strategies. We guide businesses on their sustainability journey by helping them measure and improve the sustainability performance of their operations, products, and packaging, all while boosting profits. Because when nature thrives, we all thrive. Together, we can make a difference for generations to come. Visit our website at emergerstrategies.com. Let's protect what we love together.
Yeah, first, thank you for having me on this morning. I was born and raised in Southwest Florida, fishing guide by trade, and ultimately seeing the impacts that water quality was having on our fisheries and our way of life and our economy, led me to co-found Captains for Clean Water back in 2016.
Wow. So 2016. So y'all been around for a while, and I remember it was right around then um, that we started hearing about Now or Neverglades, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Can we even go that far back to sort of set the stage for what got everything happening for Captains for Clean Water?
absolutely. And so, in Florida, if you go back 100 years, you go back a century, the system, the way the water worked in Florida looked completely different than it does today. Before man put his hands on it, water would fall south of Orlando, basically, and it would run down through the Kissimmee chain of lakes, ultimately making its way into Lake Okeechobee, where it would overflow the southern bank of Lake Okeechobee and feed what's known as the River of Grass. And that water would, 80 miles wide, flow slowly down through the Everglades all the way to Florida Bay. In the process, it hydrated the landscape, hydrated the Everglades. It replenished the Biscayne Bay aquifer, which is the drinking water supply for over 10 million Floridians, and then ultimately would keep salinity balance within Florida Bay up around Snakebite and Flamingo in that area. And so around the late or early to mid 20s, there was this effort to drain the Everglades. And, back then it was looked at as you make, something productive out of worthless land. And so there was this thought to drain the Everglades, turn it into productive farmland, divert water off of the system for development. And over the course of many, many years, both private and then ultimately the government got involved. They were successful in doing that. And so the way the system looks now is the flow of water is very controlled by man down through the Kissimmee River. The water no longer can overflow the southern banks of Lake Okeechobee. It is surrounded by the Herbert Hoover Dike. And so instead of that water flowing to the Everglades, when the Lake Okeechobee gets too high at the end of the wet season, it is discharged. That water's discharged out to the East Coast and the West Coast, where basically they made artificial connections to the lake at the St. Lucie River and at the Caloosahatchee River. And so the scenario there is you get these massive discharges of polluted water from decades of legacy pollution in that watershed out to the coast. And it has two effects. One is the pollution can fuel harmful algae blooms. The other is just the volume of fresh water for that sustained amount of time, months on end, drops the salinity in the estuaries to the point that it kills the seagrass and the oyster beds because it goes from saltwater to fresh for so long. And so you have these compounding effects of massive areas of lost habitat, and then this introduction of nutrient-rich polluted water that can feed those algae blooms. And then if you look at the southern part of the system, the water that's destroying the east and west coast, where it naturally would flow south, is desperately needed down there. So you see these scenarios where the interior of the Everglades gets too dry at the end of the wet or the end of the dry season. That affects not only the landscape of the Everglades, but it also affects the Biscayne Bay aquifer, where the drinking water comes from for Miami and South Dade. And so without that water sitting over top of that landscape and percolating down into the aquifer, you get issues with saltwater intrusion into that aquifer. And then to go all the way south, there's not enough water flowing south through Shark River and Taylor Slough into Florida Bay to keep those salinities balanced. So 2015, for example, was one of the times that Florida Bay got so hypersaline that 50,000 acres of seagrass died in what was like the birthplace of sight fishing, saltwater, crystal clear water. So really, you have this issue where that whole system was fragmented, compartmentalized, ditched and drained, water bled out to the coasts. And today you have imbalance in the entire system. Too much water going to the coast in the wet season, not enough water going to the Everglades and Florida Bay in the dry season. And so that was really why we founded Captains for Clean Water, was to get stakeholders and people who were impacted by this or who care about these fisheries to use their voice to put pressure on policymakers and government agencies to implement and expedite Everglades restoration. This is one. It's the largest ecosystem restoration project ever undertaken in the world, anywhere on the planet. It's right here in South Florida, and the good news is there's a plan in place to fix this. It reconnects that system. It has components to clean that water out of Lake Okeechobee and then deliver it south to ultimately to Florida Bay. And for the first 16 years of that project, or the first like half of what that estimated project lifespan would be, very little progress was being made on actually building those infrastructure projects. And that was a result of the influence politically by the sugar industry, by Big Sugar, who operates in what's called the Everglades agricultural area south of Lake Okeechobee. They want that water held in the lake as a guaranteed water supply. They don't want it flowing south to the Everglades. And it was also a result of the lack of public engagement and public pressure. And so for a decade and a half, you had a scenario where hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people that are affected were relatively absent from the conversation, and policy and agency personnel were just being influenced and driven by the sugar industry. And so we built Captains for Clean Water to be a mechanism to educate people, get them aware of these issues, get them aware that there is a solution in place, and that the key to that solution being implemented is public pressure, is their individual voices collectively making pressure. And so we created an organization to get people like ourselves, a fishing guide who's born and raised here. I grew up on an island called Sanibel off of Fort Myers, and fished, world famous Boca Grande for tarpon. And all of that, I was not involved. And so it wasn't because I didn't care, it wasn't because I wasn't impacted. I just didn't understand, one, how an individual like myself could have an impact on such a massive, politically challenging issue that had been in existence since before I was born. And so we created the organization to educate people. We felt if they knew about this, that they would be likely to get involved and use their voice. And if they did use their voice, the result would be public pressure that could change water policy and water management going forward.
Well, I have to say, first and foremost, I'm a huge fan of what y'all do. I mean, to me, it's Captains for Clean Water. Like, what do I equate that to? It's getting shit done and results. And I can tell you, I've lived in Charleston, and I grew up in Savannah, and I grew up fishing. And when we started getting a little bit older, me and my buddies started going down to Flamingo and camping and experiencing the Everglades in all of its insect glory. But I mean, incredible snook fishing, red fishing, tarpon are there, like just a truly amazing place. And I really fell in love with it, and camping on chickies and getting lost, and the whole experience is really it's something everyone should experience, and all of that is worth protecting. And so I am curious to know, just to shift gears just slightly, with you being a fishing guide, I do want to ask what got you into guiding, and we'll start there.
Yeah, well, I grew up on an island for
Yep.
one.
Yep.
So my mother grew up on the island south of where I grew up. She grew up on Estero Island as a kid, and then I grew up on Sanibel Island, the next island north. And so you grow up on an island, your life literally revolves around the water, whether you're, swimming, surfing, scuba diving, fishing, you name it. Um, and ultimately, my father's a general contractor, and I went to work for him naturally in the family business for a very young age in summers, and worked my way up. And even once I got out of high school, and I'd be standing on a roof, framing a roof or something on a waterfront home, and looking down at snook swimming around the dock, or tarpon rolling off the beach, and it was like, man, I wish I was out there and not standing on this roof. And ultimately, I wanted to kind of create my own path, and decided I didn't want to take over the family business. I wanted to venture out on my own, and try to make a living with my time in my office being on the water, and in doing so, create memories for people that they'd remember for the rest of their life, and the things that show them the things and the places that I love so much. And so I wanted to figure out how to do that as a career, and so I became a fishing guide, and slowly crafted that into the type of guide I wanted to be. I was very fortunate to have Jose Wehebe as a mentor.
Oh, wow.
In the early parts of my guiding career, and was able to get a lot of guidance from him on how he made that venture into such a successful career, from starting out as a guide to building his name in the industry through tournament fishing. In his case, it was bonefish tournaments. I applied that same model to redfish tournaments, and ultimately started fishing the ESPN Redfish Tour, the Redfish Cup that was going on back then, and got to travel around the country. Spent a ton of time fishing in Charleston and Georgia and North Carolina, that all that area. I'm very familiar with the coastal areas there, and so just kind of followed Jose's guidance, and ultimately built a really great career as a fishing guide. And the whole time was kind of, I would say, I was very aware of issues that we had because of water management, but I guess I was just selfish in the way I was looking at it, or naive in the fact that how good things were. And I always heard the stories of the good old days. And it wasn't until I was 16 years into a guiding career that I saw the difference, and saw the good old days kind of slipping away, and that baseline shifting down, and got pretty upset about it, and ultimately got angry enough about it to try to see if I could do something.
Well, that's amazing. And so you have this perspective, right, of kind of fishing the Southeast for redfish. Like we start to see it here. And I think what's interesting is that, I think what motivates people in your case, and in my case too, it's people protect what they love. And I mean, if you love a fishery, you're gonna okay,
Yeah.
well, this is in the way. Well, okay, well, what do we got to do about it? And I think most people think that, but then it's the action part of it. And I think that's what Captains for Clean Water has done so well with the education piece, and then providing, hey, here's something that you want to do something about it. Here's what you can do. Like, what was it a couple of years ago where y'all rallied hundreds of people down to Tampa? I mean, what was? Can you tell that
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, there was a really bad piece of legislation that was put forward, ultimately written by the sugar industry, by their lobbyists, and was put forward, that would undermine pretty much all the progress that had been made the last few years around Everglades restoration, around water management. Would have given them priority to the water over that of the Everglades. And so it would have been a death blow to Everglades restoration and to the Everglades. And we engaged our community of people that for the, past 6 years had been educating on this issue. And because they were educated on it, they took action in many forms. They called legislators on the phone. They sent emails. They showed up in person to testify to an appropriations committee with only 3 days notice. And they turned out, and ultimately over 55,000 people took action from around the country in a couple of weeks. And that bill got amended and then ultimately was vetoed by the governor as a result of that massive public pressure. And so, yeah, that model, we really just looked internally, and it was like we were really angry, but we didn't know what we could do. I mean, to tell you like how naive we were about this as fishing guides, the first person we went to try to fix it was the mayor of Fort Myers. Like, I mean, we might as well have gone to like the postmaster.
Right.
So this is a massive, massive project. It's a partnership between the state of Florida and the federal government. The state side agency is the Water Management District, the South Florida Water Management District, and then the federal side is the Army Corps of Engineers. And so we really dove into this without intentions of forming an organization. We dove into it trying to learn what could be done, what can we possibly do, and in the process of learning that this is going to take action from the legislature, the governor, from Congress, from the president, and continuous action over the course of decades. That the mayor wasn't going to fix it. Ultimately through that process, what we identified was a void. There was scientists that had been engaged on this issue since we were kids. And there was a scientifically sound, peer-reviewed solution to this problem. Engineering had been done. There's 68 infrastructure projects that had been identified that would reconnect the flow of water from Lake Okeechobee back to Florida Bay, would take down barriers of flow, fill in canals, take down levees, build reservoirs and filter marshes to store and clean water and deliver it when it was needed. There was all these, this wasn't a science problem. It wasn't an engineering problem. The void was people like us, the public pressure. And so you had special interests, consolidated industry of, a couple of massive companies that were able to influence political will. And we realized that these scientists we talked to had been beating their head against the wall for decades because they could only push that ball so far up the hill, and it wasn't getting the momentum to see this plan implemented. And so it was just these massive projects that cost billions of dollars were getting essentially pennies thrown at them. And there was no progress being made. They're spending money on ancillary projects that didn't have a lot of ROI. And so we figured that if we could get people like ourselves, why weren't we involved? We didn't know how we could make an impact.
Yeah.
So if we could educate people on, hey, here's what's going on, and here's how you can make an impact. And then we could build a machine to fill the void of public pressure and make it easy for people to, one, stay up to date and stay educated, make it easy for them to take action when their voice was needed, and then make it appealing for them to stay engaged over the course of the lifespan of this effort, which would be, decades. We thought that if we could do that, that would fill that void, and that public pressure could get the ball rolling in the right direction. And so it was really, how do we get people like ourselves who should have been involved to be involved? And slowly we built the organization to do that, starting with, Daniel and I, 2 fishing guides, and growing today to, still relatively young organization and relatively small. We have 22 employees, but that specialize in different aspects of this fight: education, communications, all the different components, public policy, governmental affairs, all these different things. So, it kind of wasn't something that we're like, hey, we're going to build it. It was just a journey that we personally went on that ultimately led to this is this void. We think we could fill it by putting these steps in place. And today it's proven to be an extremely effective model, and hundreds of thousands of people are now engaged and use their voice to leverage some momentum in the right direction.
Well, and I think I think that's probably true in a lot of areas, right? Is just people not understanding like how all this works, like how this process works, like where do I fit in, or people throw their hands up and say, well, what am I going to do about it? Like, so the fact that y'all have mobilized thousands of anglers to take action is just remarkable, really. But for folks listening, let's pretend they're listening for the first time and they're going, okay, so there's a solution to send water south. What is the obstacle that is preventing that project from moving forward? Like what's holding that up?
Yeah. So if you look at the system was altered over the course of a century. There's a plan to reconnect that system, get water flowing back to the Everglades. In doing so, reduce the damaging discharges to the coasts, manage Lake Okeechobee water levels lower, which is healthier for the lake, doesn't do the high water damage to the lake. The big challenge there is the political influence from the sugar industry, consolidated sugarcane industry. There, if you look at Lake Okeechobee, and you literally could pull up Google Earth and look at it on a map, and it will stand out to you. But there's, 500,000 acres roughly south of Lake Okeechobee in what's called the Everglades agricultural area, where is primarily they're growing sugarcane. About 98% of the crop usage there is sugarcane. And what those entities were successful in doing over the last, 50 plus years was getting water managed with a priority on irrigation, water supply for the EAA, and drainage for the EAA. And so in doing so, what that means is you keep the Everglades agricultural area artificially hydrated in the dry season, meaning you hold water back in Lake Okeechobee and treat it as a reservoir for water supply instead of a natural lake. And then you give it priority drainage in the wet season. So you're keeping 500,000 acres artificially dry in the wet season when it would normally be holding a couple of feet of water. So what that does is that takes, 1.5 million, 2 million acre feet of water and puts it down into the southern part of the system when it's already wet, making flooding issues. And then you hold water back when it's dry, making drought issues. So if you look into the Everglades, it was getting these big peaks and valleys of too much water at the wrong time and not enough water at the wrong time. And so by managing water around the desired irrigation and drainage for the EAA for these two private entities, you're managing it complete opposite of what the system naturally would function. And so it created this big issue. And if you look at it, what Everglades restoration does is it gives water managers the ability to take water from Lake Okeechobee, clean it through engineered wetlands. They're filter marshes that are built by man. They're called STAs, stormwater treatment areas. And they're basically, 4 or 5 foot deep marshes that have a ton of aquatic plants, from hydrilla to cattails, all these things that take up the nutrients out of the water and send clean water out the bottom end and deliver that clean water to the Everglades. The sugar industry the sugar industry sees that water going south of them as a threat to their water supply. They want to see Lake Okeechobee as a reservoir, have as much water in it all the time as possible until the rainy season, when they don't need irrigation water from the lake, when they're just, operating off of rainfall. And so to them, they see it as a threat. The reality is they haven't suffered a crop loss due to water supply since the early 80s. And so they're trying to ensure against a once in 100 year drought scenario where the coastal communities and the Everglades are being impacted annually by this mismanagement of water. And so the tack that they take is to influence politics, simply influencing policymakers when they're running for office. During an election year, they can give, $20-30 million a year. You have a consolidated industry of a couple companies. It's very easy for them to align priority wise on policy. They've got an army of over 70 lobbyists just in Tallahassee that are walking the halls handing out checks to policymakers. They've got political influence and connections in the federal side all the way up as high as the presidency, to the Oval Office. And so very, very strong political influence. And for years, it was, you look at them in the state of Florida, the sugar industry is one of the top 1 or 2 political donors in the entire state on any given year. So they're one of the most powerful political entities in the state and in the country. And if you're looking at is how do we, affect this change, you're not going to do it going lobbyist for lobbyist or dollar for dollar. The power that the only opportunity we have to take a chink in that political influence is public pressure and getting people, individuals who are impacted. If you look at the sugarcane industry, it's a couple $2 billion a year industry in Florida, supports 5,000 to 10,000 jobs. If you look at the tourism industry alone in Florida, $129+ billion a year. If you look at the real estate industry, the recreation industry, the hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars and millions of jobs that are impacted by water quality. And it's a matter of getting all those people aligned and getting them all to use their voice, and ultimately making the case of this is an environmental issue. It's an ecological issue, but it's having these economic impacts. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, you turn this into a language that policymakers understand. It's revenue and jobs. And 2, you can justify the investment of billions of dollars over the course of 30 years coming out of the state and coming out of the federal government into Everglades restoration, because it's an investment on the economy of the nation. And you look at it, it's a 4-to-1 return. For every dollar spent into Everglades restoration, you see a $4 return into the economy. And so making this ecological problem and connecting it to the economic impact has been really important in getting significant funding. The way the sugar industry was effective installing this was they just weren't, the policymakers weren't putting money towards these projects. If you've got massive projects to build, you don't have enough money to build them. They just drag along and very little progress is made.
Well, and they had no one to tell them otherwise, so it was easy money. It was like, hey, this is the position you need to take. There's no opposition.
Right. There was no opposition. A lot of the policymakers just didn't, they don't know. And they're up there, they're hearing from, the sugarcane industry saying, do this. This is really important to the jobs and economy here. And there was no one else that was connecting the dots and giving people the mechanism to use their voice to say, hey, I'm a restaurant owner, on Fort Myers Beach, or I'm a bartender in downtown Fort Myers, or I clean hotel rooms or anything else. I'm a fishing guide. There was nobody able to say this is impacting me, and we were able to show that impact through some of these water crises. 2016, we started the organization because we were in a water crisis. We were getting massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee into our home, into our backyard where we were guiding, and it shut down our fisheries. It destroyed our fisheries. It fueled a massive red tide bloom. People who were here at the height of tourist season went home, and fishing guides were out of work. Hotels were empty. Restaurants were empty. And, it got to the point where you have these coastal communities that their entire existence relies around that tourism industry, that there was food banks and soup kitchens, on the barrier islands, on Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach, providing groceries to people that worked in restaurants and hotels because they were being laid off. They couldn't feed their families. There was no business. And that impact was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for Daniel and I, ultimately to walk away from our dream jobs, to try to do something about it, and also for our communities as a whole to realize all of us have a stake in this, and if we expect to continue life as we know it here, it's going to take us being involved to move the needle. And that goes all the way to people who may have never been to Florida or to the Everglades, but it's on their bucket list to go tarpon fishing in Boca Grande or in Everglades National Park, or, these are iconic fisheries that, many people, it's like, that's their life goal. I look at it is kind of the same as the way I look out west or Alaska. Like, I don't get to go there every year, but those places are so special to me. I've only been to Alaska one time in my life, but when the Pebble Mine fight's going on, that's a big deal to me, not because I live there, my business is based there, but because that's a place that I see as so special that I hope to be able to go enjoy it a few times in my life. And I hope that it exists for my son to be able to experience. And if I can take a couple minutes out of my day to use my voice to impact the future of a place like that, then I'm more than willing to do so. And so that's kind of what we've tried to ignite among not just the angling community, but starting with the angling community and having a massive ripple effect out through just anybody who cares about clean water and the outdoors and the businesses that rely on clean water. You look at the outdoor industry, look at companies outside of Florida. You look at small companies like Marshware based in Charleston.
Yep.
You look at big companies like Yeti or Orvis or, Columbia or AFTCO. I mean, you name it, Mercury, Yamaha Outboards, Boat Company. And there's all these companies that are outside Florida that have a major stake in Florida's waters. And so getting all of those different entities educated and empowered and activated to use their voice has been what's driven significant progress with Everglades restoration the past few years.
Yeah, and it also it reminds me. So my day job is I do sustainable business consultancy, and one of the things of sort of educating businesses is helping them understand what you just described perfectly, is that you're part of a system. Okay. And there is an environment, there is society, and there's your company, right? And it affects it in different ways. But if you don't take care of the system, can't take care of the people, and you can't take care of your business. And so it's understanding that there are, at least in my opinion, yes, there's nothing wrong with sugar in theory. What the problem is that just like with anything, you can't have one company or industry or organization affecting the lives of thousands of other people for their own selfish interest. And
Okay.
and that water is public. I mean, that's is the way unless I misunderstand that. I mean, that's public water that they're withholding.
That's right. And it's really that, they're influencing water managers and policymakers to just, there's not enough capacity in the current system to put that water south. So it's like, if they can just delay that, the current system works perfect for them. It was built to keep that area dry in the wet season and wet in the dry season. And so it's like, it's just a delay game for them to maintain the status quo. the thing there is Everglades restoration was designed to work in conjunction with the development that's happened over the last century in Florida with the sugar industry. It doesn't put them out of business. They just see it as they want this guarantee over and above what they actually need. Where Everglades restoration is designed to still provide water that they need and also provide the water to the Everglades that it needs and reduce the discharges to the east and west coast. It's just a greed thing of, we want the absolute ultimate perfect, more water in the system than we could possibly need as this insurance policy, even though they're a federally subsidized crop. They're the most heavily federally subsidized crop in the country. They receive over the two companies, U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals, receive over $300 million a year in subsidy benefit. Tariffs on import sugar to artificially inflate the price of domestic sugar, and then a guarantee that whatever the market doesn't demand from sugar production, that the government will pay for that leftover product to sit and basically rot in a warehouse. So they're in a game of produce as much sugar as possible, not as much sugar as the market needs, and so they're just looking at this ultimate scenario of delay to keep the status quo, and we can coexist. The Everglades and coastal communities and the tourism industry can all coexist with the sugar industry. It's just they can't have this greed outlook of wanting the system to revolve around them and everyone else being secondary. I mean, right. The Everglades is a national park. It's a World Heritage Site. That in itself should be the top number one priority. And
there's no place like it on planet Earth.
No, everything else should come after that.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that there is absolutely nothing like it anywhere else in the world is remarkable, and it's right in south end of Florida, and the biodiversity, the ecosystem services that it provides for clean water, for our fisheries, providing habitat, drinking water,
migratory bird habitat. I mean, you look at birds from Canada rely on the Everglades as a wintering ground.
Yeah. I mean, wow. All for, it seems, when industries get a little too big for their britches, they need captains for clean water is what they need to keep them in check. So I do appreciate that. But so Chris, what is, I've been seeing, I signed the petition. Can you tell us more about, I mean, when I say the latest today, I don't know what date it is. It's the end of May, but this is in the last few weeks that this has happened. What is their latest shenanigans?
Yeah. So Everglades restoration has to overcome all these hurdles throughout this multi-decade time frame of all these projects getting done. And like we talked about that Senate Bill 2508 a couple of years ago that would have threatened the funding for the key, kind of the big cornerstone project of Everglades restoration, which is called the EAA Reservoir. Yep. That was one of those threats or attacks. And so that project, it's called the EAA Reservoir, is a massive reservoir, 16,500 acres. So to put that into perspective, you could put the entire city of Manhattan inside of this reservoir. Okay. It's the largest single project that the Army Corps of Engineers has ever constructed. It's a reservoir that sits south of Lake Okeechobee, south of the Everglades agricultural area, within the footprint of where the sugar industry operates. And it will take Lake Okeechobee's polluted water during the wet season into that reservoir. It will clean it through a filter marsh, and then it will deliver that water south to the Everglades during the dry season when it's needed. So it basically acts as a flow equalization basin to the lake. Instead of the lake getting too high and discharging that water to the coast, that water's put into the reservoir, and then it's cleaned, and then clean water is delivered to the Everglades to Florida Bay. That reservoir carries the greatest return on investment of any of the 68 projects in Everglades restoration. That one project is kind of the linchpin, cornerstone to all the other projects that work in unison, ultimately that will provide the relief to that whole system and reconnect the timing and distribution of that water. That project also is the most politically challenging because the sugar industry sees it as a threat to their water. Any water that's going into that reservoir and going to the Everglades is water that's not available to them. And so their first move was to stall that project through Senate Bill 2508 by taking the dedicated funding that the legislature had put in place to fund that project and making it available to other projects. Basically defund that project by spending the money on other things. That failed, thankfully, through a tremendous amount of public pressure and ultimately the veto of that bill.
That was the one that was in Tampa, is that right?
It was in Tallahassee, but
Tallahassee, that's what I meant.
A bunch of the guys from Tampa all over the state. We had guys from Charleston that drove to Tallahassee.
Yeah.
We had companies, from all over the country that showed up there. But so ultimately you have this project that today, when we started, we were told like that project's never going to happen. It's the most politically challenging. It needs to take place where they're currently growing sugar on state-owned land that they're leasing back to the sugar companies, and it won't happen. Today, that project's under construction. It's literally being built. The filter marsh, that STA component, is completed. They're filling it with water as we speak to begin the grow-in process of the plants that will ultimately clean the water. The EAA reservoir, the storage capacity reservoir, is under construction and is slated to be completed around 2030, 2032, somewhere in there. And that's a massive, 30-foot tall embankment walls,
Wow.
massive project. So what happened was first they tried to kill that project by not having it built at all. They were unsuccessful. The project's now under construction. They went in last year and they sued the Army Corps of Engineers, actually year before last, sued the Army Corps of Engineers over the operations of that project, basically saying this is a threat to waters that we should be guaranteed. And so instead of sending that water to the Everglades, we should get access to the water in this reservoir. So essentially, the taxpayers would spend $2.5 billion to build a reservoir that's intended to keep Lake Okeechobee levels down and deliver water to the Everglades. And that instead of sending that water to the Everglades, we should give it to them for irrigation, suing over the operations. And what that does, or would do if they were successful, is two things. One, it'd be a taxpayer-funded water supply for a private industry that is already subsidized on the shoulders of taxpayers. But two, if you were treating that reservoir as a water supply tool, you would want it full all the time. So what would happen is instead of the way that project will operate under its intended use is that it gets full during the wet season and then it becomes empty throughout the dry season so that when you come back into the consecutive wet season, it's empty and it has capacity to take more water out of the system. The way you would operate that if sugar had it as a water supply is you would want that reservoir full throughout the dry season to guarantee that it was available if you needed it. And so what would happen is you would then enter the next wet season and there would be no capacity within the reservoir to take water out of the lake. And so it would be discharged to the coast. The Everglades would still have been starved from the water throughout. So it would just continue this cycle of operating that area in the complete opposite manner of the rest of the system. And so what we decided to do was the first step was it went to federal district court in Miami. There's the sugar industry, and there's three parties on the lawsuit. It's United States Sugar Corporation, which is U.S. Sugar. It's Florida Crystals, which is Okolante, Domino. It's Florida Crystals. And then there's the Sugarcane Growers Cooperative. So it's the co-op. So you got three entities. Each one of them are named on the lawsuit, and they're suing the Army Corps of Engineers over the operations, saying they're promised water guarantee and that this is a threat to that promise And so that they should get the water, they should get priority over the water in this reservoir above the Everglades. They filed a lawsuit at district court. We filed an amicus brief, which is kind of a friend of the court statement in conjunction with some partners on behalf of the Army Corps, saying that, a counter argument and saying this is the intent, this is the impact that this project can have if operated correctly, and this is the reason why it needs to be built and operated this way. And the judge found in favor of the Army Corps. He cited our amicus brief in his remarks, and the sugar industry was unsuccessful in that lawsuit. They since then have filed an appeal at the federal court, at Court of Appeals in Atlanta, appealing that decision. And so they've also hired over 50 attorneys. One was the Solicitor General under the Bush administration, so very high level, powerful attorney team that they've put together. And so what we wanted to do was shine a light on this. One, so that people would be aware of this is how, two consolidated companies, consolidated industry is able to influence things like this. And this isn't where 2508, where that Senate bill was done on behalf of sugar, but essentially through proxies. They said, this is what we want. They had their lobbyists draft up a bill, hand that bill off to policymakers that they had made political contributions to. Those policymakers filed the bill. But in the eyes of the public, there's no direct, the sugar industry's name wasn't on it. We all knew who was behind it. It's the only people that would have benefited from it. This is an instance where their name is on it. It's very clear. Sugar industry, these parties are on the suit. They're suing over this. So was one to show the public all these actions, all these threats to this progress is coming from the sugar industry. This is an opportunity to see directly. There's no denying it. They cannot deny it. Their name's on it. The other is to put the judge isn't going to be, necessarily impacted by the public pressure. He's going to go by the rule of law, and I'm confident that he's going to find in favor of, or he or she will find in favor of the Army Corps. But also maybe sugar industry, look, do the right thing. You have record crop yields every year. You're not hurting. This is not going to impact you. You don't actually need this guarantee you're trying to get. And at the detriment to the entire rest of the system, it's at the detriment to Lake Okeechobee, the health of the lake, the coastal communities, the Everglades, the drinking water for Miami, all these things. Do the right thing, drop your lawsuits. And whether or not they decide to do that is up to them. But we felt it was our responsibility as an organization to educate on the abilities of Everglades restoration and the challenges and threats that Everglades restoration face, to show this to the public, so that there's a better understanding of this is why we can't get complacent. This is why, as much as it might sound like a broken record, we're going to face these similar challenges throughout the entirety of Everglades restoration. And people they can't get complacent. They can't get, issue fatigue. We've got to stay engaged on this and use your voice on it for years until these projects are completed, until water is once again flowing from Lake Okeechobee all the way down to Florida Bay. These threats will continue. And this is a really good example of how those political and legal threats ultimately influence the actual movement of water.
Unbelievable. And not to mention, if this isn't obvious to every human being and animal on the planet, clean water is the most valuable asset in the world. To have a company that is taking $300 million a year in subsidies from taxpayers and then saying, yeah, and we want all the water and we want to be able to dirty it up and then we want to be able to discharge it, and the hell with everyone that's in its path. I don't care about how you're able to provide for your family. That's our water, because we want to make sure that we have enough sugar to grow, and in a market that's not necessarily even demanding that much sugar.
Right.
That's insane.
It is. Yeah. And it's there's something else that's interesting there is that the sugar industry, they've kind of taken a playbook out of special interests like big tobacco, things in the past where it's like they're implementing. You look at the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, you turn on the TV right now and like every other ad is for some drug to ask your doctor about. And it's like, they're taking this PR approach that has been proven effective. You look back, when the tobacco industry, they had, whatever it was, Marlboro Light cigarettes preferred 5-1 by doctors. So it's funny because they like to paint themselves as farmers feeding America.
Right.
And this lack of prioritization of water would be a threat to America's food supply. Reality, there's a lot of very, very important fruit and vegetable growers in Florida that do provide the food, to feed America and winter vegetables for sure. They're not located in the EAA. They get their water from completely different water supplies. You can go on the USGS website and outline the EAA, and it tells you what the crop usage is there. It's number one, 400,000 acres, sugarcane. The next highest crop in there is sod. And the next highest crop in there is fallow land that's not planted. You don't get to a food crop until you're like 5 or 6 down the line. That's rice. And it's a couple thousand acres. So it's this, they like to hitch their wagon to actual farmers feeding America when they're actually these massive corporations producing a poison that is making America fat.
Right. That, by the way, is terrible for you.
It's terrible for you. It's a drug. Yeah. And so, it's just that, but that they've got, huge PR firms out of Washington, D.C. and, put out messaging, put out misinformation, confusion. Their tactic is not to get people, the people who are engaged now, the hundreds of thousands of people who are aware of this and are using their voice. Their tactic isn't to get those people to take their side and be like, yeah, this isn't right. All they have to do, their tactic is to try to confuse and divide. And so they'll put out narratives to the East Coast community saying, you're getting discharges because all the rich people live on the West Coast of Florida and they don't want the water. And then they'll put out narratives to the West Coast saying, you're getting the discharges because all the rich people live on the East Coast and they don't want the water. Right. And then they'll put out narratives, to the Bass community and the inland community saying Lake Okeechobee is being held too high because the coastal communities don't want the water. When actually the sugar industry is the only ones advocating for a high lake. So they want these people who, when unified, are very effective in moving progress. They want them fighting each other, or they want people to be confused on what is causing discharges, who wants the lake high, to where if you're just confused on something, you're not going to engage and use your voice, whether it's taking action on a petition or whether it's going and getting 10 of your friends to join in on this effort. So they run these campaigns that are misinformation campaigns, confusion campaigns, and division campaigns that are just created to maintain the status quo and try to fight back at this population of people who are now educated and engaged. The way that we combat that misinformation is through education. The more people we can educate, the reason I'm doing a podcast with you today is to reach more people, educate them so that they can see through the BS and the propaganda when it comes, into their mailbox or onto their social media or into the, narrative in a user group or a friend group and say, actually, no, that's not true. The only people that benefit from a high lake is the sugar industry. And, they can see through that. So that's really, it's interesting because it's this, they'll run ads whenever we get big discharges and we have a red tide event and things like that. They'll literally run ads in the newspaper and on TV about how, we're farmers feeding America. And it's in addition to a big political machine, there's this whole, propaganda PR machine. It's like, of the whatever, 5 to 10,000 people that the sugar industry employs, the vast majority of them wear suits and ties and hand out checks. They're not in overalls running tractors.
Right. They have got their hands in the dirt in quite some time,
No.
if ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Chris, where a couple things that I want to ask, and first of all, we've been talking about the petition. People can just go to captainsforcleanwater.org, right, and find that petition pretty handily.
You can go to our website, captainsforcleanwater.org. You can go on any of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook. We've got Twitter, got TikTok. Whatever flavor you prefer. But yeah, go on there. You can sign that petition. It just takes a couple of minutes. Your voice and the cumulative number of people. We've over 15,000 people have signed as of this morning. We want to see that number continue to grow. We don't have a goal of what the ultimate number is. We want people to add their voice to that list and say, look, we support the Everglades. We support water management for the good of the people and the good of the environment. And we support doing what's right over what's wrong, and that they should drop that lawsuit and send a message to them. So yeah, that's a big thing is, if you don't do anything else, go on there and sign that petition. But I would encourage you, if you don't know about Captains for Clean Water, to go on our website and look through some of the content, go on our YouTube channel, or our social media channels and watch some of the videos and we make it pretty easy to educate yourself at a high enough level about this issue and about the solutions and about what's going on, that take a little bit of time when you're on your commute home and listening to a podcast like this, to go on there and listen to some of the educational content that our talented team has put together. And I think if you do that, you'll be part mad, part infuriated, and part inspired to add your voice.
Yeah, well, I would agree. Y'all put out some great content, and I'm a small drop in Florida's tourism bucket, but me and my buddies come to South Florida every single year, and we look forward to that trip every single year to go chase tarpon, to go have a good time. We eat at the restaurants, we stay at the hotels, we book guides, we spend our money down there because of the fishery, and that is something that has ripple effects throughout that economy. And I think that if you have ever spent any time in Florida, or you just appreciate good fishing, it took, I think, about 10 seconds to fill out the petition. If you can spare 10 seconds out of your day and want to do something today, if you're listening to this, go to captainsforcleanwater.org and sign the petition, then get educated and hopefully get active and show your support for what they're doing. I'm a proud supporter of what y'all do, because like I said, y'all, in my opinion, y'all get shit done, and I'm a supporter. So thank y'all for everything that y'all do.
Yeah, thank you. And the point to the economic impact, I guarantee you, when you and your buddies in Charleston are getting ready to go, you probably go visit Hadrill's and get some supplies, and you're spending money in your local economy to prepare for your trip to the Everglades once a year, and that's the case all over the country, all over the world. The economic point is one that's important for policymakers to invest, the money that Everglades restoration needs. But for us, it's just what's right, man. It's like, this is a special place, and if you lose it, you don't get it back, and it's slowly dying, and there's a plan in place to, get it off of life support and back into recovery, and have it be better tomorrow than it is today. And that's ultimately why we push so hard every day. But we appreciate the opportunity, and hope that people take a few minutes and add their voice and join our fight.
All right. Well, special thanks to Chris for all he is doing to protect what he loves. Also, thanks to Captains for Clean Water for rallying the troops, as always. If you like what you're hearing, one of the easiest ways to support the show is leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.